Thank you all for joining us this evening. And of course, as ever, thanks to Molly and Amanda and Zemi at Blue Sky for all of the work that goes into making these things happen, especially Amanda, who's fantastic at being the sort of producer of the session. This has been a hard few weeks for us in Portland, even in the midst of what's already been a very hard year. Obviously, many Oregonians affected by the fires, people losing their homes, their workplaces, some losing their lives. For those of us in the Portland community, we also had the passing of Glenda Goldwater, who is just this remarkable figure who loved the arts. And even if you didn't know her, you knew who she was because you always saw her at various arts events. And then the passing this week of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There was a really amazing op-ed in the New York Times yesterday written by Eric Motley, who's a pretty prominent Black conservative. And he was talking about when he arrived in Washington, D.C., he was very young. He was working for George W. Bush, and he was at a dinner party where Justice Ginsburg and her husband were also guests. And they started talking about classical music. And they ended up becoming very close friends. And that music was the thing that connected them, although they talked about race and about politics and about many things. And it reminded me, as many of you may know, that Justice Ginsburg was very close with Antonin Scalia. I don't know if they ever sided on the same way in any Supreme Court case, but they were very good friends. And again, opera and music was one of the ways they connected. And those were such good reminders about the way that the arts can help us build friendship, build discussion, and build community. So thank you for joining us tonight as we are countering some of the loss that we have all been feeling this year with community and with art. And there are some new faces, some familiar faces. You know, when I started doing these programs when we were still in the gallery, but even then, the idea was that if you came in and just looked at the art and maybe chatted about it with whoever you were in the gallery with, that was one thing. But the opportunity to talk in a larger group with people who you might not know or who you might know just from seeing them at arts events about art and also about poetry was a way to build community. The poetry lets us bring in additional voices, also lets us stretch our muscles for those of us who are used to talking about and thinking about visual images in new ways. And then always when we're having these discussions, it's not about getting to a right answer. It's about the way we build understanding together, that you will doubtless observe things about the poems and photographs we're going to look at today that I have not thought of, even though I spent a lot of time staring at them and thinking about them and as I was selecting them for tonight. And that we will all learn from each other in the discussion. So that's kind of what it makes this exciting. Now, as Amanda mentioned, and as Molly is making evident, the gallery is open. So I'm just curious, like, how many folks have actually been in and gotten to see Kiliii's show in person? A few. Oh yeah, only some of you whom I dragged personally into the gallery. If you are able to go, it is really fantastic, and a reminder that there's a big difference between looking at work online versus seeing it in person. And the other show that's up is also fantastic. How long is it up, Amanda, and when does the new show go up?
This is the final weekend actually of the exhibitions for September, which is crazy to think about. I will also say that there are virtual tours on our YouTube channel for both the shows, so you can kind of halfway in between the website and visiting in real life. And so yeah, there's still appointments available for tomorrow through Sunday. Actually, we're gonna be open on Sunday. Molly will be there, so there's extra days. Hopefully people who want to can get down there. And then we're opening next month's shows on first Thursday, like always. And that's Angel O'Brien, and help me out, Chris, who is our second exhibition in October. Diana.
This is the only time when there is actually right answers.
I know, right? I should have. I can't. Her name escapes me at the moment.
I'll find out.
Diana Nicolette Gian. Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay. Thank you. I was close. I got the first name. So those are going to both be really interesting shows, and both those artists will be doing Zoom artist talks, and you can register for those right now on our website.
Fantastic. And another curious question, has anybody in this group been to the Arctic? The actual Arctic, not just the pictures of the Arctic? Ooh, Kristen, yes. I feel like I know that.
If you hold down your space bar, yeah.
North of Fairbanks.
And I know Emily is an Alaskan raised, though she's in Portland now. And Chuck and I have visited extended family in Labrador. He spent a lot more time there than I have, which is not quite the Arctic, but gives you a hint as of what it's a bit like. So I'm going to change things up a little bit tonight and start us off talking about a poem before we talk about the photography, and maybe get us thinking about the way that we think about and talk about poetry versus the way that we think about or talk about photography. And there are, I think, some big similarities. And so the poetry we're looking at tonight is from this book, which is The Charming Tale Corpse Whale. The Charming Title, Corpse Whale, and is by a poet whose name I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce, Nanouk-Okpik, and she is Inupiaq-Inuit, which means that she is from Alaska. And in this book, she has, amongst other poems for each month of the year. So I thought maybe we would start off with a poem called, and again, I'll be mispronouncing this, I'm sure, Inupiaq-Inuit, September Moon. So let me bring up my slides. It's like a month is just long enough for me to forget how to do this smoothly. So here's the poem, and I'll read it and then we can talk about it. Inupiaq-Inuit, September Moon, Inupiaq-Inuit, early fall moon when the birds fly south, Inupiaq, a scarecrow rock structure made by piling up stones in order to steer caribou in a certain direction. Our time when bear, moose, and caribou are hunted, then put away for winter. Her, my many wounds close. Fish are cleaned, dried like my eyelids with alderwood splints I gathers. Masu, wild potatoes placed in sea oil. Tinics or bearberries purple like her, my veins, picked in caribou fat. She is, I am a scarecrow, mixed with bear, with pilot, bred like a wafer of Eucharist to control the herd. All right. So just take a moment and maybe look at the poem a little on your own and think about, what do you notice? What strikes you about it? Do you have questions about it? And
I think this, instead of a raise hand, perhaps we could try the yes arrow that's on the bottom of everyone's participant screen. So if you go to your bottom screen and click participants, it'll open a window.
that's not actually true for me because I'm in
Not
the.
true for you? Okay.
Well, but I'm in the. I think it means that I might not be able to see it.
Oh, there we go. Kristen Blalick.
Okay.
Yes. So something that puzzles me right away is her use of her, my, she, I through the poem.
Yeah.
Is that referring to the moon and the person, or I don't know?
Having read the whole book through a couple times, I can say that this is something that the poet does in pretty, not every poem, but through many of the poems. And it may be that every time there's a first person I, it's always her/I. So as I like to say, we don't have to know why the poet did it. I'm not expecting you to speak on behalf of the poet, but what's the effect for us as readers of having it? So you've given us one possible way of reading it, Kristen, that that it could be about the the moon personified as her versus the speaker of the poem as I. Are there other ways that folks are reading it?
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, for me, I kind of was reading it more as the scarecrow rock structure. That was the double being, was the author and the scarecrow.
Oh, so you're still seeing it as another figure, but a different other figure. And Inupiaq is the word for that structure. She's kindly gives us, whenever there are words in the Inuit language, she follows them immediately by the translation. It's very thoughtful. And Molly, is your hand sort of up?
Are we doing yes? Yes, my hand is up. So kind of building on that notion of the her, I, she, like I sort of heard that as a kind of collective experience of a people or a group, but also the kind of action is collecting and preparing. So I kind of saw that, I don't know, sort of that experience as something that is shared, but also is in action. What is happening with preparation, say, for the next season.
Yeah, yeah. And I've thought about this a little bit with the poems. Not sure that I feel like I have the right answer, but I feel like there's sometimes it feels to me like it's about the persona that's speaking the poem, as well as the poet being able to see from a sort of a third person perspective, to inhabit both the experience and the observer of the experience. But again, I'm not quite sure. And it looks like Emily Dawson has a hand up. Maybe Emily, if you'll unmute yourself.
It made me wonder about how her language used pronouns in the first place. So when you say I, is it a more of a collective feeling? And what is an individual in a herd, really?
Oh.
You know, the caribou herd and the people in her that are doing the gathering. I don't know, that's what it made me think of when she says her, my. It's sort of like, it doesn't really matter which one of us it is, because we're all part of the same group.
Yeah.
If it's somebody she's looking at, or if it's her herself. I also found it really interesting at the very end of the poem how she brought in, after all these really archaic feeling images, the pilot bread and the wafer of Eucharist. And then bringing that control of the herd back. It was almost like there's a sorrow to it. Obviously, it's a really, it's a hard thing to be a controlled people. But I think it's really interesting that she actually made the reflection between the caribou herd and this, using kind of religion as a way to control a herd too.
Yeah, so the wafer of Eucharist is this clearly very Christian imagery coming from the communion made with the wafer, and symbolizing the body of Christ. I shouldn't cut it off there. Emily, I'm curious, do you know what pilot bread is? I had to look it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's those big crackers. I think they probably stay good for a long time. I think it's something that's used at sea, or something that is easily preservable. So I'd imagine that it's something that was distributed in villages too, as white people started to move in and turn nomadic tribes into villages, and start to stock them with food instead of having them go hunt and gather. So.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that layer of it. That is to say that the village itself can be culturally imposed, as opposed to the way that people would have been living within their culture without outside influence or force. Yeah, when I looked up pilot bread, it was defined in terms of hardtack, which is familiar from the Labrador part of our extended family. Amanda, I've been doing a terrible job keeping an eye on who's waiting to speak. Who's next?
Chris Rauschenberg is up next.
Well, I just wanted to say relative to that last sort of thinking about controlling the herd, that, you know, that societies have are on a continuum between how much they value the freedom of the individual versus the sort of societal control. And, you know, America with our cowboy mentality, you know, don't tread on me, I want to do whatever I want. And if I want to swing my fist, who cares if your nose is there, you know? My sort of looking at this has to do with that she sees herself simultaneously as part of the Inupiaq structure that steers the herd in a certain direction, but also that she's a member of the herd, and that she's, you know, that this is something that societally is not an oppressive thing, but it's a good thing. It keeps you on track. The herd needs steering, and that she's a voluntary participant in that.
And even that, compared to the cowboy mentality, I will do what I want, when I want, where I want, how I want. This poem is all about a life being oriented around seasons, right? September moon. So I could have chosen October moon or April moon, but this poem is about September moon. But it's really telling us that this is what's happening at this moment. And look at how those are all defined. It's in terms of what's going on in nature, both flora and fauna, and that defines what human activity is, right? We put up this structure now, we are hunting in this way, we are preserving fish for winter in this way, we are gathering potatoes and storing them in this way, and then all of that is not, I'm doing whatever the hell I want, I'm not just swinging, I'm responding. Amanda, is anybody else waiting?
Yes, let's hear from Mary Lang next.
Hi there. So I was looking at this and thinking, because the her, my, she, I kind of just stops the flow so much. I thought, well, I'm going to read it through as first person, and then I'm going to read it through as third person, and then from that I got this feeling of commonality or sort of no separation between one person and another person. So anyway, it felt much more moving to read it as, you know, my many wounds close. You know, I gather wild potatoes placed in sea oil, or bear berries purple like my veins pickled in caribou fat, or something. To just read it, you know, you have a choice to read it one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think we are from a culture that is drawn to a first person narrative, whereas I think other cultures are less comfortable with the first person, with assuming that the first person singular is the way that the world is. But I do think it's easier for us to respond in some ways.
Well, I think you could read it as easily as our time when bear moose, her many wounds close, fish are dried, she gathers wild potatoes, you know, and bear berries purple like her veins. I mean, I think you can read it like you could choose to read it one way or the other, or both, read it both ways, and then sort of realize there's no separation between one person and another or something.
And it looks like Emily Dawson has offered us another reading in the chat, which is that the her could also be the caribou. I should say, I also happen to know that Emily is a hunter. So her the relationship of the hunter to the caribou is probably you're probably keenly aware of it. Amanda, who's up next?
Looks like we're at a pause.
Okay. Well, are there other parts of this poem or other aspects of this poem that we haven't commented on that are on people's minds, either something that struck you or something that you're wondering about? And it looks like Kim also is, like Chris, responding to the idea of the Inupiaq is maybe being the her. Although the part about the bear is really interesting. She is, I am a scarecrow, so that's the Inupiaq, mixed with bear, with pilot bread, like a wafer of Eucharist to control the herd. So I think that this idea that the beings aren't all distinct, but that there's overlap or commonality seems to get, a lot of us are finding that in the poem. One of the things I like about this poem is simply that it is an amazing reminder of how much is alive in this landscape, both flora and fauna. We get lots of different animals, but different plants as well. And that sense of when you are there and you know the place and you know the seasons of the place, you see all of these things that to us might, if I had started off with a pop quiz, what lives in the Arctic? How well any of us might have done on that quiz, as opposed to the clear experience of it. And Eugenia's put a comment in that chat about how the lines go in this poem. And there is, it's interesting to me where the line breaks fall, because they don't fall, the line that ends fish are, if this were prose, that fish are would have been on the next line, right? Her, my many wounds closed, period, end of line. Fish are cleaned, comma, dried like my eyelids with alderwood splints, end of line. She, I, gathers masu wild potatoes placed in sea oil, end of line, right? So we could even spend time talking about the formal qualities of the poem. Why do particular lines end when they do? Why are some lines enjambed, meaning they continue past the line break? The idea flows into, or the phrasing flows into the next line. Other poem thoughts? Well, maybe then we'll go on to look at some of these incredibly beautiful pictures. I'll find my way back there. And again, just take a few moments and think about what strikes you in the picture. What do you notice? What questions might you have? And it looks like Kristen has a hand up, and maybe, I think Kristen, then maybe Kim and Molly. I can't tell if your hand is up, but we'll start with Kristen.
Charging ahead again, I guess. What
Please.
strikes me is all the stuff lying around the tent. There's no evidence of a person, and it seems very like someone left very hastily, or something happened that they would have abandoned their camp in such disarray.
So you're assuming there's nobody inside the tent?
Right. I see something sticking out of the tent, but it doesn't look like it would be attached to a person, but it could be. Yeah, it just strikes me as this is a camp rapidly, suddenly abandoned, or.
Well, I guess I back up to the question of, do we see evidence of the human there?
Mm-hmm.
Or
well,
is, yeah.
In the tent itself, and I mean, looks like someone's pack or bag on the snow, and I see a cup or something. It's hard to tell.
Right. So, I mean, clearly this is human stuff, right? It's human
Right.
stuff, but is the person present or absent, and how do we know? And Kim, are you waiting to jump in?
Maybe not. I could say something.
Okay.
Laura, is there something you wanted to say?
Who? I can say something. I don't know if you're asking me or not. I'm Laura. I actually see something a bit different. It looks so like something so meticulously laid out, and I don't think, and I mean, those are valuable things to leave behind. The other thing that struck me was is what time of day is it? You know, the land of the midnight sun. So it could be day or night, and what looks so actually like almost like figure ground, like I have to really sort of make things out. And so I wonder what I would call that, like expectant, almost like, the vigil. So I see something very almost anticipatory in this, or the quiet getting ready for something.
Yeah.
Beautiful composition. I mean, that's for sure.
Well, I'll tie what you said to something that Robert put in the chat, right? A blind is designed to hide human presence. And I presume that when you are whaling, there's not a big chance that the whale under the water is going to be able to see the human on land. So I don't know that it may just be that the word blind is getting used in the term of like the place that the person hunting is hanging out. But I think that what Laura was saying about waiting, the anticipatory, right? That's what a good deal of hunting is, right? Is the waiting, that we've seen all of these items that are necessary for the hunt placed, and now it's just the waiting. And your point about what time of day, that this is the way this photograph is framed, we can clearly see what is supposed to tell us the time of day, right? The sun is in the frame, but again, we don't know how to read it if we're not from this place. We don't have a good sense of how to read what that position of the sun is telling us about time of day. And this question about foreground and background, like where, it's worthwhile asking, where does foreground end in this picture?
Let's hear from Chuck.
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a question of where does foreground end, but also the only clues to scale in this are the human objects, right? If you took out all the human objects like the tent and the harpoon and the rifle and the bag, you would know maybe it was the ocean and some snow, but you wouldn't necessarily know how big anything was. Right, that those are the only clues we have to the size of objects in the frame. I mean, we know that that's the sun.
Can I echo something that Chuck just said?
Sure.
So one of the things that really strikes me about this photograph is that I'm looking at what appears to be an enormous landscape. I was just on the Oregon coast last week, and it was foggy and smoggy from the smoke, and I could sit by the side of the ocean and know that the ocean was vast, but I couldn't see where it began and where it really ended. And I get the sense that without the tent and without the harpoon and all the equipment in this, it would feel exactly the same. There's no real way to tell how far things off are on the distance. How far is the horizon? How far away is the sun? How vast is the sky? How big is the ocean that these hunters might be lurking near? Do they have other equipment? Whales don't typically jump up on land. And so how are they getting into the sea? And then what are they doing afterwards? So this is one of those moments where I'm getting a sense of scale and intimacy in an enormous landscape in a place that I don't understand as far as a way of living. And it's a really interesting composition because of that tension between the intimate and the infinite.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. And you're making me think of one of the things that Kiliii says about this work is, you know, for most of us looking at these photographs, the Arctic is a place that we don't know, and that there's this long tradition of the voyage to the Arctic. But there are people who live there, millions of people who live across the Arctic. And for them, that's just life. It is the same as when I walk to the Fred Meyer, right? And I wonder whether this sense of not being able to judge scale or distance would be as true for somebody who has spent most of their life in this landscape, or would you be as able to read this landscape as we are to read the landscapes that are most familiar to us? People are sort of commenting about some of the equipment in the photograph, right? That's also the way this picture is framed. The evidence of human occupation of the landscape is literally central to the picture, right? It's not just foreground against this vast expanse, but it is right smack in the middle of the photograph.
Let's hear from Emily and then Chris after that.
There's something, you know, it's a hunting scene, of course, and we see weapons in the frame, but I think they're taking a break. The binoculars are hanging up, the rifle is ready to go, but whoever is operating the rifle is not at it. So they're probably taking a little bit of a break, and it's a really peaceful, beautiful, quiet scene to me, which is like one of the best parts about hunting is just being out in the landscape and just like feeling it.
You can translate that to Oregon by saying fishing, and then more people will understand what you mean. Right?
Or hiking, you know, just stop for a minute and sit down and enjoy it. But then the act of actually, you know, the quickness that a kill happens and the necessary violence that accompanies it changes the landscape, this landscape, very, very much. And the amount of blood that a whale produces and the amount of chaos that it is required the amount of energy that goes into a successful hunt is humongous. And so this is sort of this beautiful moment before any of that starts and happens. And I don't know, there's something really, really, really beautiful about that latent, but there's tension here too. So it's like there's very calm, but there's tension as well because the rifle is positioned there. The harpoon is, you know, wound up, it's ready to go, it's pointed at the sea. It's just like, if it's time, it's time, and you can't miss a moment.
And you know, it's interesting what you're saying about the anticipation of the hunt, which we talked about a little bit before, and Nolan put into the chat, I'm just waiting for somebody to crawl out of the tent. So I think there's also a way in which, as viewers of the photograph, we're sort of stalking, like, who's the person here? Where's the hunter? Where's the hunter? Where we are waiting to see the hunter. We want to pounce on that in the same way that the hunter wants to pounce on the prey, right? That there's this whole chain of knowing there's a being there, knowing there's a presence there, and waiting for it. Was Chris up next?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to say, relative to your talking about, and by the way, I love that intimate, infinite conjunction. Those two words are amazing together. But relative to what you're saying about the vastness of the landscape and how that looks to cultural insider versus outsider, we have a nephew who grew up in Kansas and New Mexico, and he moved to Oregon and Portland for a while. And then he came to us at one point and said, "Don't be mad at me, but I'm going to go back to New Mexico." We said, "We're not mad at you. It's fine." He said, "Yeah, I just kind of get claustrophobic or something here because I can't see the horizon around me. So these trees in the way.
Right, right. That our comfort with landscape is, I think, is very dependent on where we have spent our time. I know other people who have gone from, you know, Texas to Boston with similar. How does this work? How do you know how to do anything without the horizon? And somebody else noted in the just the relationship between the sea level and the land that we're on here. The horizon is so prominent, and yet, as we said, like that sense of how close or far anything is messes with it. This is all leading to the polar bear. We'll see if we get to the polar bear today. Do we want to say more about this photograph or go on to another?
I think we might be ready to go on.
And I love that this one is called Confluence. Take another moment and just look at it for a bit. What do you notice? What questions does it raise?
Looks like Emily's ready to start.
Great. Emily?
I can't help myself. This is one of my favorites. I really loved this whole show, but this one just took my breath away. It's incredible. It's incredible the amount of blood here. I think is the most stunning thing. I love that you cannot see the source of it, and I love that it's beautiful because it is beautiful. This sort of harvest cycle, and I'm so glad you paired the poem of the harvest and what it takes and how cyclic that is, and if you're honoring the beauty of it, then it really is an amazing exchange of energy. So that the sea coming to take that back in all of those nutrients that are going to go back into the ocean and feed all the microorganisms and the things that are going to eat this amazing store of nutrients. It's just such an amazing photograph.
Oh, I'm glad you added that last part because I had never thought about that. I think of the blood that is lost from the whale that's been hunted, but not this idea that then, I mean, obviously the whale itself is going to feed the hunter and whoever the hunter share it with. But the idea that even what's pouring out to sea then becomes part of other lives and feeds other beings, which of course totally makes sense when you say it. I just had literally not ever occurred to me. And Laura said in the chat, the permeability, how everything is a part of everything, which I think fits, Emily, with the specifics of your comment, but also in confluence. When you live in Portland, the confluence I usually think of the Willamette and the Columbia coming together. But the confluence here, there's so many ways to read that title. I was going to say the confluence here means, but then I thought, no, Lois, this is the opposite of what you mean to do, which is to say to invite multiple readings that that folks might have. Amanda, is anybody else waiting to speak that you can see?
Yes, Chris Rashberg.
Yeah, I mean, the blood for all of us is a recapitulation of the primordial sea. When organisms got to be too big to interact with the sea directly cell by cell, they had to develop circulatory systems and move the ocean around through them. So this is, to me, this has this incredible sort of thinking about that and about how the ocean is our life's blood in not just a species way, but in the form of all life. But I think also Kiliii talked about, and you know, for this picture, that for people who are outside the culture, the picture looks apocalyptic. And for people inside the culture, it's like the way it is here in Portland if the Trailblazers win the championship. You know, it's like, oh my God, there's a whale, there's food for everybody. It's a grand day for
Right.
all of us.
Right. You know, our family in Labrador is very sensitive to what people who are outside the culture think of the seal hunt, because for them, the seal hunt is a natural way of life, and seals are not endangered, and they don't understand why people get upset about it. And somebody I know in Labrador once said to me, you know, if you took a cow out, put it on the snow and slaughtered it there, it wouldn't look that good either, but you don't think about that when you're having a hamburger in, you know, a city. So you're right that the understanding of reading this from the point of view of somebody for whom the successful whale hunt is an incredibly great day really changes it. And, you know, one of the things about the color in this picture, right? In all of Kilii's pictures, there's obviously a lot of shades of white and blue and kind of grays that play off both of those colors. But here it's red, white, and blue. And, you know, the red of our flag, I'm sure at some point in elementary school, they taught all of us that, you know, that's for the blood that was spilled to blah, 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 blah. And there is something really striking about seeing the red, white, and blue when it is actually all of the pieces of nature that we, what's the word I want, that we sort of make symbolic, that we pull away from their actual manifestations. Molly has put into the comments that this photo disrupts our expectation of the sea and forces us to think about what the image is saying, because of the relationship. Well, Molly, can you unmute yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Well, I think it's sort of a summary of what everyone has been saying up to this point is if we, and I think you mentioned it, like kind of being outside of the culture, not really understanding what this means, we might have different associations or a different understanding. And so an image like this forces us to take that deeper look. And I appreciate learning more about, you know, why this image is not only a beautiful image, but what it really says about another place or time or culture.
Yeah. And even just like a whale is a really big thing to kill, right? So even if you have fished or been around people fishing or hunting, they're usually not taking down anything on this scale. So just that amount of blood, to generate just that amount of blood, is a reminder of how big the whale is. And Kim asked in the chat, you know, would it help us to see this, the context of this photo within the collection? And that might be an interesting thing for people who have gotten to see the show either in person or through the walkthroughs in the gallery that the team has put together. How do you read this differently when you know it in the context of the other things in the show?
I'm gonna jump in. I'll say this is probably brings the most drama of all the images. Most of the other ones are really serene and blue and white and bright.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just like, red is a color that's not much in any of the other images, if I'm remembering them correctly. A little bit in another one that we may get to tonight, but it's not, there's just so much of it, and it's such a big break with the other things in the show. Although I think in some ways, seeing it in the context of the show, you're in the more images that you see, the more you are in the Arctic, in which case it's not as strange as if you saw this and it was the only image of the Arctic that was in a gallery space that might have, you know, either a bunch of different photographers work up, or even work by a photographer that wasn't all so Arctic based. And it's interesting to me how much you can start to notice about the space. Like I said, oh, well, this water here is pretty shallow. And one of the people I was in the gallery with said, how do you know that? And I said, well, if you look over like this, on the right-hand side the image, it looks like that might be rocks or something. To me, that implies that that we're pretty close to the beach, and that that this stuff is that the liquid is barely covering whatever else is there. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. It could be something floating, but it feels like it's close in. Whoa, what have I done? Hang on. Sorry, I have to move all the things to make it go back. That just trying to orient myself against the landscape was really interesting. Is anybody else? I've got a hand up, Amanda?
Yeah, let's hear from Chuck.
Hey, I guess I just had another thought about this in looking at this one and the last one. You know, we're still, the last one where we were asking, well, where's the human? And in this one, and there was sort of, maybe as Emily said, that was a resting moment. And here we see the evidence of some incredibly violent action, but we still don't see the human, and we still don't see the whale. We're still seeing a moment where the action has taken place, unlike the previous one where the action maybe was going to take place. But we're still just seeing the landscape of it, or the seascape in this case.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have the moments or the hours before, the moment or however long this is after, but not, as it were, the thing itself, which is really interesting too, and maybe a little bit of catching us up. We want the action movie. We want the whale being taken down. And in fact, that's not what these photographs are about.
Laura, did you want to chime in?
I do. But it's created some kind of visceral response in me. I know that, and what I was going to write was that how the color broke through. It broke through the ice, and it broke through the ocean in a way. And it's like when the wildfires were here, and they still are. But I have a lot of people on the East Coast that, all of a sudden they're aware of the West Coast fires. They're not here, but there is this, as vast as the ocean is, we're connected to that, and I think that's it. It's just this awareness, and this may conjure up for some of us disgust or horror, and something else different for somebody else, So I think, to use the ocean as an example, to be able to have a container that can be a witness to all of that. So
Yeah.
I actually feel this is a wonderful teaching illustration. Yeah, it's a wonderful meditation. And yeah.
Yeah, and Kim put in the chat that the red is a grounding, and I think it's certainly true about this photograph. Like, your eye can't not go there, even though it's hard to say exactly. I mean, literally, you can see how hard it is to tell where the red ends and the blue of the water or the white of the snow start, that there's clearly overlaps and mixing, but yet it is, as you say, it's what calls our attention to the within the photo, within the image, within the landscape. And that Mary has put in the chat, these are also really abstract in some ways, although clearly we can tell exactly, here is water, here is sky, here is snow, here is blood. But there's something about maybe the absence of human figure. Am I understanding your comment fully, Mary?
I think that in some ways, even though they're representational, they're also sort of flat and two-dimensional in many ways. And so it just becomes like an element, and a red element, a white element, so that if you were to draw the shapes, they would just be kind of very abstract. And for such a sort of gory photo, it's unbelievably calm. that horizon just, you know, sort of settles everything.
A whale has died here, but the horizon does not care. The sky is still going to meet ocean just as it has and just as it will.
You know what, I also, this is just me, it's this one moment, if somebody didn't know where that was, but my mind is going, yeah, the ocean, that is for sustenance, right? And yet I think of all the people that are migrants, like refugees, trying to, who died in that ocean too. You know, their blood is in there too. So that's why I said it's a huge container. It's a, I don't know, it's like a prayer.
Well, and I think it's also, how do we relate to ocean, right? So do we only think of oceans as the space of transit? You are getting across oceans. Do we think of oceans as sources of danger, right? Drowning. Do we think of them as sources of sustenance? The things that I eat come from the ocean, and I have to understand the ocean in order to sustain myself and my family and the people who are part of my group. There's another hand up.
Yes, let's hear from Nolan Straightburger.
Yeah, it is very metaphorical, I think. You know, I don't know who was saying that, but with the people dying, I see it as like culture as well, because my wife and daughters, they're Native American, and their tribe was a whaling tribe, and you know, they relied on the ocean and the rivers for fishing, and they lost all their rights. You know, they don't even have fishing rights for the tribe. And I see the blood in that as like assimilating or something as well.
Yeah, so there's the question of fishing rights, and then there's also the issue of the destruction of species with the acceleration of the climate crisis, right? That the poem that we started with is in part about understanding the seasons and the cycles as part of the way that you hunt and trap and preserve seasonally. I can think of now deceased member of our Labrador family who was talking about it, even as a child, like you understood you don't hunt hare or trap rabbits at this time of year because it would be wrong. You have to wait until they're through their breeding cycle. So there's the political denial and destruction of fishing or whaling rights, but also when the human collective overall has abused the resources so much that there aren't species left for the kind of sustenance fishing and sustenance hunting that existed for, I want to say eons, but I don't know literally how long an eon is, but certainly for thousands of years. Other thoughts on this one, or do we want to go on to another image?
No other hands are raised, so I think we should move on.
Okay. That's why I like Amanda. She tells me what to do in her sweet Amanda way. So this one is called Mactac Slabs on the Ice. And again, just take a few moments of noticing, wondering. Amanda, I notice you're eating. Are you having Mactac while we discuss?
No, just some trail mix.
I can't tell Eugenia whether your comment about liking the geometry is about this picture or the last picture.
No, I think this one. I'm sorry, you guys. Yeah, no, I liked that last one a lot. It had great. It was fantastic. And even though, you know, because I don't want to be, I just have to say my own statements, and whatever I feel and get through stuff, is not gonna, I don't want to be offensive, but I don't want to. But yeah, this one is very, look at the, you have the geometric shapes of the ice behind there. You have this geometric like slab. It's very kind of abstract, if you know what I'm saying. And that's what's nice about his work, is that it is abstract. And in that abstractness, we can take our own, he's not telling us what to get from it. We can draw from our own experiences and stuff, what we can get from it. You know, it's very good. It's interesting.
I'm fascinated by how often the word abstract is coming up in our discussions today. I'm wondering if I had a degree in art history, if I would be jumping all over that word and wanting to say, oh, this is not literally abstract, but that there is something about the way we're being put into this space that is resonating across the images, it seems like. Laura says, well, butchering is not such a pretty picture. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Is this a pretty picture? And even as I say that, I'm thinking about a comment I think that was made about like comparing one actor to another, the difference between being pretty and being beautiful. I don't know if this is a pretty picture, but I think this is a beautiful picture. Amanda, are there folks waiting?
No, not at the moment.
Well, what do you guys think? Is this pretty? Is it beautiful? Oh, Molly says yes, aesthetically it's beautiful. Molly, tell us why.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a beautiful, and we talk about abstraction. It is an abstraction of. We could think about it as an abstraction of the elements that are being photographed. But aesthetically, the composition, the relationship between the foreground and the background, the geometric associations that someone else brought up. Now, if you want to think about content and what it is, other people might beg to differ that it's a beautiful picture. But I feel it's aesthetically really, really charged.
And you are the one with a better art history background, more formal training in art history background than I have. But the joke in our house is perspective, our friend from the Renaissance, and just even thinking about the way that these lines of MacTech slabs are oriented, right? That our eyes are following them out into the distance. And then we have the shapes that are, to my mind at least, seem to be going more wide than deep in their orientation, the chunks of ice, and then seeing land beyond that, not just sky, but it looks like there's a little bit of green maybe in the background. And I realized that I've been missing comments that are flying by in the chat. Robert said this thing about, we know that there was a violent act. We saw this blood in the previous image and this image, but not one that's necessarily implies malice. And I think part of it is, again, for those of us who do not hunt or fish even, blood is bad and wrong. We're not supposed to be in instances where blood turns up. But for people whose access to food is that they are killing their own food, that's it's much more normalized. And so the idea of does violence imply malice it's a question with the privilege of, well, I just go to the store and pick up my food.
Looks like Chris and Chuck have things they'd like to chime in on.
So Chris, then Chuck, please.
Just going to say that we actually have been talking a bit at the Blue Sky Exhibition Committee about abstraction. We have a number of exhibition committee people who are very interested in it. And I feel like that photography is this mixture of art and science, and that to talk about a photograph as in terms of abstraction is to look at sort of one side of that balance. That a photograph is a combination of sort of visual, abstract qualities, but combined with that is also a scientific rendering of how something looked at a particular instant, with lots of detail, with an unbelievable amount of detail. And that those two things are melded together in a photograph. And that when you sort of look at a photograph that has a lot of meaning and a lot of content on that side of the equation, and you take the sort of formal skill to make it also be beautiful on the art side of the balance, that's very noticeable, because we normally expect in a picture that's got lots of blood in it that's going to just take over and push everything else out. So it's the visual skill of the photographer draws attention to the fact that this is also powerful in the abstraction and formal quality.
Yeah, I think there's so much about the technique and the technical that is at work here. I have to say that after seeing the show, I was like, I totally want to go to the Arctic because it's really beautiful. And it gave me this idea that any bozo could walk around with a camera and just snap pictures because everything there was so gorgeous and it would look as good as these. And I think that that's part of Kilii's brilliance, is that these pictures, there's so much about the place that I think in some ways they erase or obscure the technique that went into the making of the pictures, so that you just believe that you are observing the place and not what we are actually doing, which is observing Kilii's documentation of the place.
Yeah, when you talk about somebody exhibiting mastery, the most common thing to say is they make it look easy.
Right, yes. I think Chuck was waiting next.
And then Mary after that.
Great.
I guess I just wanted to say, like, think about this and then think of like a Dutch still life with like piles of grapes and birds and meat and cheese. And you'd think this is, kind of an Arctic version of that. These are items of incredible value to the people who spent their energy getting it, and will literally give energy to them as well. Right? It's like this, it's an abstraction, but it's just this very real, here are some calories, and they probably, if you have a taste for MacTac, this is probably really friggin' awesome to eat.
I bet this is the MacTac drive-through billboard shot. I think also the question of, Kim put in the chat that that the MacTac is perpendicular to the horizon. So it's different than the way we were relating to the horizon in some of the other images. But also, again, back to the comment, which maybe Chuck, you made for the very first image that we looked at, which was that sense of like, where is the scale here, right? Like, is a slab of MacTac like a Slim Jim? Like, is that the size we're talking about? I want to say no, because of the enormity of the landscape. But again, that question of not even, it's so clear what we're looking at, and yet it still can feel kind of disoriented.
And Mary Lang next.
So I wish that I were in Portland to be able to actually see what's on the walls, because while people were talking, I was actually on his website and going through a lot of really amazing pictures, but many of them are more journalistic, and there are pictures with people standing outside that tent that we said was uninhabited, and a whole town around tons of people around the MacTac where you can tell what size it is and stuff. And so what is interesting to me is for photographers who might be getting, paid a lot of money from National Geographic to go and do a journalistic story or project on something, but at some point their eye is also seeing what you might call the art photos or the abstract photos, and then so I'm just curious, is the show on the walls mostly these empty art, more mysterious ones? Are there any ones with people in them in their huts or doing some of the things that are on his website from this project?
I would say that the majority of photos that are hanging do not have humans in them, although I can think of at least 3 offhand that do. So it's a mix, and there's like which images are in the gallery on the walls. And when I'm putting these programs together, I can only go with which of the images that are in the gallery are also on the website so that I can steal them and put them into my PowerPoint to share with all of you. It wouldn't necessarily have been the same ones, although in some ways it's nice to have it narrowed down because there were so many amazing and compelling photos. I knew I was going to work with Confluence for this, and I didn't know which of the other ones to go with. I'm tempted to take us to another poem, and I realize it's getting a little late, but if people want to stick around after the poem, we can look at a couple more images. Does that sound right? Amanda, tell me what to do.
Let's do it. That sounds great.
All right, excellent. So this is another one of Dig Nanouk Okpik's poems. Whalebone Wolf Hunter's Dance. A Nanouk, a whalebone wolf hunter, creates a whalebone arrow in a Z pattern. He gently slides the sharp end into walrus blubber, freezes the fat whole, then places it in a trap line. A black-tipped silver wolf eats the frosted muktuk. Thawing in the stomach, the dart springs, piercing the membrane lining. Isibru, a whalebone wolf slayer, oblique holes for eyes in a wooden mask with a dancing gorget, rises to the hunt. Take another moment on your own, read it over, think about what you think. I should have said, read it out loud to yourself because everybody's muted, but this has got some fun sounds in the mouth. Whalebone, wolf hunter's dance. Folks have thoughts or questions about the poem?
Looks like Emily's ready to start us off.
So interesting that a whalebone wolf hunter is such a different word than a whalebone wolf slayer. And that the hunting and the slaying are actually 2 very, very different activities.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure what to make of them. Like when you say hunter, I think I know what a hunter is. And when you say slayer, I think I know what a slayer is. But why are these so different? And you're right, like even the Inuit words, nanouk and Isibru, don't seem anything like each other.
Right, like they're coming from different roots and different, responsibilities totally. And I don't know, I'll speak as a hunter again, just that I totally see the truth in that. I mean, the hunting is a completely different experience than the decision to skillfully end a life that isn't your own. It's like to make that choice, it's a big decision to make, and you have to do it well or they're suffering. And it's a really big decision and it's a big responsibility. And then once you've made that decision, then you've taken on not just the responsibility of honoring the life that you've taken, but it's a lot of work then. It's like when the work really starts and you have to do so much afterwards. So I don't know, it's just, that really stuck out to me. I thought there's so much wisdom in that. The way that her language works around the hunt is so, I'd love to know more about her language.
Yeah. And it looks like we have Kristen, Chuck, and then Alan. So Kristen, you're up next.
I guess my thoughts about it are influenced a bit by what, is it Emily who was just speaking? Yes. My difficulty is because of decades as a vegetarian. I have all kinds of reactivity to killing other beings, which I know that I've felt that I need to work on that. But it seems like this kind of approach to getting a wolf fur is very essential to clothing in the Arctic for the people, and decoration. I mean, so I know that they do hunt the wolf, but why? It just seems like piercing the membrane lining seems like a very suffering way for the animal to die. I guess that's what struck me first from my perspective. So.
I mean, I agree with you. The last time I ate meat, Jimmy Carter was president, so it is a little bit weird to spend so much time around these hunting images, both images in the poems as well as in the photographs. For me, although I think vegetarianism is also something that works a lot better in a place where a lot of food that you can eat grows, which is not necessarily an option that you have in the Arctic. That isn't to say that there isn't any berries or other plants that grow there that can be eaten, but I think that that's also we forget how much that's geographically dependent.
Right.
Not a lot of kale.
Right, and the cold requires very different food.
And things that can be preserved. I think part of the understanding of this kind of hunting is that, like, what's a more humane way to kill a wolf? Well, a lot of that depends on what you have, right? So a whalebone arrow means that I am taking the thing that I gained from my whale hunt and crafting a new tool with it, right? If I don't have access to guns, if I don't have access to metal traps, what is the way that I can do this? Chuck, what were you gonna jump in with?
Sorry, I was thinking, I'm wondering if what we're seeing here is the whalebone wolf hunter is the actual person doing the hunting for the whale, and the whalebone wolf slayer, which is wearing a wooden mask with a gorget, is some sort of ritual dance that's the sort of representation of the hunt rather than the actual hunt itself. I don't know other than what's in the text, but the wooden mask, I mean, that could be snow goggles, I don't know, but the dancing gorget makes me think it's somehow some sort of ritual rather than an actual hunt.
Yeah, I think for those of us who live or have lived in the Northwest, when we think about the masks that we associate with the Native nations here, it feels like that may be the case. And it's interesting to think about the reading that you just put out there. Like, even if you look at the poem, the Nanouk is set flush on the left-hand side, whereas the stanza about Isibru isn't flush to the left, right? So even in that way, they're not, one is an echo of the other, but not quite the same as the other. And I think that that does make sense. And it kind of asks, to me, begs this question about, like, what's the relationship between the hunter and the prey, and what's the relationship between the hunting and the dance? And I think this gets us back to where Emily started us thinking about this poem. Alan, you've been waiting very patiently.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was surprised at my reaction to this. because I hadn't actually seen this kind of technique or knowing about it as far as trapping goes. But if you look at the history of trapping around the world, the fur trade, birds, and here for the wolf, it's really places it in the category to me of a torture death, where it's a long, slow, painful kind of thing. There was a lot of trapped. Well, Lewis and Clark came here for the fur trade, but if you look at what trappers did and what the animals had to suffer to go through it at an extended length and things like that, it just makes me, it reinforces the idea that people are similar everywhere. They're very much alike. And if you have a rancher here who wants to poison whatever is interfering with his economic activity, he's all for it. But other people, would not like that. So it's kind of an insight into human nature all around, and when you have a need, you can create a story and a narrative of why you need it, how it's done. You can create all these ceremonies, but it's really quite violent. And I think someone had said to me, I read somewhere, that people would treat animals differently if they had facial expressions. A lot of animals, different kinds of animals don't have the vast array of facial expressions that people have, and so you don't see the suffering. It's very easy to ignore that. Now, I eat meat. Sometimes I don't, but it's it just goes beyond my personal thing for what you do to get what you want or what you need. And also that as a human activity, as you push into the, human populations push into different environments and what they do to survive, that is, if you do this activity, you can live there. And you can, but you didn't have to live there. You didn't have to do that. You have to do that to live there, but you can choose not to.
Although
do that.
I think that for the Inuit who occupied this area, it wasn't like, traditionally, it's not like you could just hop on the next Alaska Airlines flight and move to Seattle or move to Portland. And I do think there's a difference between the kind of trapping, because there's a beaver hat craze in the East. And so we get kind of the Astoria trapping of beavers for a fashion, as opposed to the clothing that is the only option, not only just because there's nothing else there. Again, there's not a Fred Meyer to go buy a jacket at, but also because it's the clothing that is appropriate to the place.
I guess that's what I'm talking about. In order to live there, you have to do you do these kinds of things.
Right.
So that's human nature.
Right. That there's subsistence economies, which is to say, I'm not going to kill more whale this year just so that I can put it in the bank or invest it in the stock market and see if I do better in 10 years down the line, right? That that hunting and trapping to get the right amount to make it through the next X number of months until the next food source is available is a different thing. But it's also interesting to think about the androcentric way that we can come to this. That wolf, when that wolf is taking out its food, it's probably a pretty violent and maybe prolonged to death for whatever the wolf is killing. But we also don't impose our expectations on the wolf as we might on the other humans there.
Well, that would create a whole nother philosophical debate that we could go down about, are we animals or are we human beings?
Right.
That kind of thing. But I guess my main point is there's trapping versus hunting. And I'm not personally against hunting and subsistence living and things like that, but I'm just am kind of put back into reality about what people do to get what kinds of things they will do to get what they need, what they want.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it. It was just kind of like, so that hit me harder than I thought it would. And in the opposite way of someone from one of these cultures, because I remember, you know, fishing and a lot of things where the fish are kind of like making little noises as a kid, and we would fish out the water. There'd be these migratory runs in the Pacific Basin, and you know which bay to go to at a certain place at a certain time. Our family went in, we got a lot of fish, but you know, fish were like squawking away, making little noises and stuff, and they were flopping away and dying. But it's not like, that's, you know, that's kind of hunting or gathering.
Well,
it's not the trap line, torture death kind of thing. I could never.
I think that this may also be really culturally dependent on the things that we're used to and the things that are common. I see that that Chris and Emily are both waiting, and I don't know if there's anybody else beyond that. So why don't you guys, Chris and then Emily?
Yeah, I was just gonna throw in a couple of movie recommendations to get more sense of the sort of cultural stuff. There's a movie from 2010 that is Werner Herzog's re-edit of a Russian show about a trapper in Siberia, in the extreme north, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's amazing and gives you more insight than than I've ever had before into, you know, what that extreme northern life is and trapping and all that. And then the other is the first movie shot in the Inuit language, which is The Fast Runner, which is an amazing movie. And there, when Lois was talking about, you know, yeah, us people who have plants around us can be vegetarian, but when you look at The Fast Runner, it's like, oh, you cut yourself. Well, here, let me cut you off a slab of Band-Aid. You know, everything has to be made of either ice or meat, you know?
Right.
Anyway, those are two amazing movies that I recommend if you're interested in this cultural stuff.
Thank you. Oh, and somebody looked up Gorget. I should have said I also had to look up Gorget earlier today, but yeah, it's a covering that goes around the throat, which you can imagine might be part of that kind of wooden mask. Emily, what do you want to share with us?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a thought about honoring life of the animal, and the relationship between the method of the kill and what is harvested probably are very related. So like you know, what's valuable about the wolf is maybe the skin and the hide, and so to honor the life, taking the life of the wolf, it's very important not to harm that piece of it. So I think there's probably, although it may be easy to interpret that as maybe more painful, it may be considered in the culture and in the exchange of energy to be a much more respectful way to take that life. And then there's the ritual piece of it too, which is something, at least I didn't grow up with a lot of ritual in my life, but there's a really powerful way to relate to resources if you ritualize your relationship with them, and they become a lot more meaningful. So that the ritual, I think, is also a really important part of the technique of the hunt as well, and honoring the life and the necessary violence there.
Yeah, and I think that comment about ritual gets us back to that relationship of like the hunting and the dance. If we assume that the Isibru is a traditional dance, that is ritual around the hunt. And I realize now that when we were looking at the very first poem, there was an image of a raven, and the raven image is not on every page, but on many of the pages in the book of poetry. As you see, it's not on this page, but that the raven is a trickster figure for the Inuit. We talked, for those of us, those of you who were here last month and we were talking about the coyote as a trickster figure for Southwestern tribes, and the Navajo in that case, or the Diné. And here we are with different figures, but the idea from the first poem of being part bear, right? I think that's also part of what you're getting at, Emily, about the respect for the different ways that all of these lives, all of these different forms of life are interrelated and interdependent in ways that to an outsider, and especially to an outsider who relies on things that are very abstracted from our consumption of them, feels weird and strange, but is literally the most natural way of being for the people there. It's quite late. And as usual, I look down and go, oh, look at how that time flew. I don't know if people have final thoughts, and I will just like flash through. I can't even remember how many more pictures I put in here, just because somebody asked the question about, are there human figures in any of these pictures? And this is another of the many wonderful pictures in the show. Look, it's Terrence listening for whales. Didn't even know that was a thing. And presumably whatever Terrence is using to listen for whales is probably the product of some other prior kill, that there would have to be some object. You couldn't just mail order your plastic whale listening ear trumpet. And I'm trying to think, did I put any pictures? And then this was the last image that I put in, which the way that we walked through the gallery, this was actually the first image that we saw, and it is, to me, the most abstract, even though it looks like a painting, but it's actually a photograph. And the Fata Morgana is an optical illusion that happens on water, which can make it look like a ship is floating. It can even make it look like a ship is upside down. But this looks so painterly compared to how, you know, for all people were calling them abstract, how very crisp and realistic most of these photos are. So I don't know if people have any final thoughts, or if we should just agree.
Well, that one thing I noticed in the last image, you know, like on an oasis, when it's so hot, you have a mirage. Then conversely, the cold is so cold, maybe, that it makes this, maybe?
You know, I wish that I were better at paying attention to whatever it was that I read very late at night, explaining the Fata Morgana and how it works. And like the Flying Dutchman ship is probably related to this phenomena on the water. But again, it's
observation. That's
well, let's meet up again on October 28th and do some more of this with a whole new set of pictures. And I can't even remember who we said is going to be in the gallery. Angel and Diana, right, are the next photographers. And we can go in starting first Thursday. Blue Sky folks, any last words you want to share?
Thank you so much, Lois, for leading another great program.
This is so much fun. And I have to say, I would when I knew that I wanted to talk about Kilii's art, because I think that we are all feeling very trapped at home at this point. And I was like, I want something that will take me to another place. I was thinking, will I be able to find an Inuit poet? And I felt really so lucky to come across Dig Nanouk okpik's work. It is quite beautiful. And I recommend Corpse Whale in the way that you can never recommend anything called Corpse Whale to folks. Thank you all for being part of a great conversation. And we will see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.